Then Moses led Israel from the Red Sea, and they went into the desert of Shur. For 3 days they traveled in the desert without finding water. When they came to Marah, they could not drink its water because it was bitter. That is why its place is called Marah. Marah means bitter. So the people grumbled against Moses, saying, "What are we to drink?" Then Moses cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a piece of wood. He threw it into the water, and the water became sweet. There the Lord made a decree and a law for them, and there he tested them. He said, "If you will listen carefully to the voice of the Lord your God and do what is right in his eyes, if you pay attention," now they're not going to do what's right in his eyes, they're going to do what's right in their own eyes. Yeah, so that's what human beings want to do. We don't want to do what's right in the Lord our God's eyes. We want to do what's right in our own eyes. "If you pay attention to his commands and keep all his decrees, I will not bring on you any of the diseases I brought on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you." Then they came to Elim, where there are 12 springs and 70 palm trees, and they camped there near the water. Again, I can't tell you where Elim is. Marah, Elim, these springs of water, I don't know where they are. People today might try to have some idea. Maybe they do. Okay, but we're talking about events that occurred a long time ago, and who knows how much the topography of the land has changed since then. I don't know. I'm not qualified to be able to tell you about that. The whole Israelite community set out from Elim and came to the desert of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, and on the 15th day of the second month after they had come out of Egypt. In the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. But you have brought us out into this desert to starve the entire assembly to death." Then the Lord said to Moses, "I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. In this way I will test them, and I will see whether they will follow my instructions. On the 6th day they are to prepare what they bring in, and that is to be twice as much as they gather on the other days." So Moses and Aaron said to all the Israelites, "In the evening you will know that it was the Lord who brought you out of Egypt. And in the morning you will see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your grumbling against him. Who are we that you should grumble against us? We're nothing. We're just people. We're no different than you. Why are you grumbling against the Lord?" Grumbling against Moses and Aaron means grumbling against the Lord, because he has appointed them. Moses also said, "You will know that it was the Lord when he gives you meat to eat in the evening and all the bread you want in the morning, because he has heard your grumbling against him. Who are we? You are not grumbling against us, but against the Lord." Then Moses told Aaron, "Say to the entire Israelite community, 'Come before the Lord, for he has heard your grumbling.'" Grumble, grumble. That's what it's like. Murmuring. While Aaron was speaking to the whole Israelite community, they looked toward the desert, and there was the glory of the Lord appearing in the cloud. The Lord said to Moses, "I have heard the grumbling of the Israelites. Tell them, at twilight you will eat meat, and in the morning you'll be filled with bread. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God." He already said this. Okay, we read that several verses ago. In fact, he said it to him a couple times. This is just another one of those examples of the text saying the same thing a few different times. It's not how we write it. We get confused by this. Okay? We get confused by this. In fact, this is one of those things that some of the smart people will tell you is proof that multiple people wrote this document. Now, I don't deny that there were editors later on that modified the document in slight ways. I don't deny that. Whatever Moses wrote at this point in time in the days after the Exodus and following, I don't deny that that document was copied over many times and was edited slightly by later editors or redactors, scribes, whatever you want to call them. What I have an issue with is the idea that it must have been compiled and composed by multiple different people and then put into one document. This is a modern assumption. We presume this because that's how we would do it. All right. We don't, when we read these passages and these paragraphs and we read the same thing being mentioned several times in a row, stated 2 or 3 times or more before we can move on to the next thing, we assume this is because 2 or 3 writers have written the same thing and they've just been all smashed together somehow. Because that's how we would do it. That makes sense to us because that's how we would do it. But that's not necessarily how they did it. That is a presumption on our part to assume that because we would do it, that automatically means that's how these people would have done it. That's part of our own modern hubris and arrogance. That evening, quail came and covered the camp. And in the morning, there was a layer of dew around the camp. When the dew was gone, thin flakes like frost on the ground appeared on the desert floor. When the Israelites saw it, they said to each other, "What is it?" For they did not know what it was. Moses said to them, "It is the bread the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Each one is to gather as much as he needs. Take an omer." What is an omer? Probably about 4 quarts, 4.5 liters. "Take an omer for each person you have in your tent." The Israelites did as they were told. Some gathered much, some little. And when they measured it by the omer, he who gathered much did not have too much, and he who gathered little did not have too little. Each one gathered as much as he needed. Then Moses said to them, "No one is to keep any of it until morning." However, some of them paid no attention to Moses. They kept part of it until morning, but it was full of maggots and began to smell. So Moses was angry with them. Each morning everyone gathered as much as he needed, and when the sun grew hot, it melted away. On the 6th day, they gathered twice as much, 2 omers for each person, and the leaders of the community came and reported this to Moses. He said to them, "This is what the Lord commanded. Tomorrow is to be a day of rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. So bake what you want to bake and boil what you want to boil. Save whatever is left and keep it until morning." So they saved it until morning, as Moses commanded, and it did not stink or get maggots in it. "Eat it today," Moses said, "because today is the Sabbath of the Lord. You will not find any of it on the ground today. 6 days you are to gather it, but on the 7th day, the Sabbath, there will not be any." Nevertheless, some of the people went out on the 7th day to gather, but they found none. Then the Lord said to Moses, "How long will you refuse to keep my commands and my instructions?" The Hebrew of "you" here is plural. "Bear in mind the Lord has given you the Sabbath. That is why on the 6th day he gave you bread for 2 days. Everyone is to stay where he is on the 7th day. No one is to go out." So the people rested on the 7th day. This was a tough command for them to keep. The Sabbath day was always a tough one. It seems weird to us. I mean, maybe not. We can be workaholics too. Now their culture was a lot more physical labor than ours is. We have a lot of white collar jobs today. A lot of non-physically intensive jobs. I don't have a physically intensive job. A lot of non-physically intensive jobs today that really don't require a lot of hard manual labor. These people did. It's hard, it's hard to imagine why they were so addicted to their hard physical labor that they just could not take a day off. Like they just couldn't. Keeping that Sabbath day commandment was so difficult for them. You'd think that with all the hard labor they had to do just as part of their daily lives, they would want a day off. We have weekends today. Our culture is based on a 5-day work week, not a 6-day. Their culture is on a 6-day work week. They were supposed to work 6 days a week and take 1 day off. Our culture today, this has faded somewhat as the years have gone on, but we still basically have a 5-day work week, Monday through Friday. So we have 2 days off each week. But one thing that's interesting is that the cultures around Israel didn't have a Sabbath. The Sabbath is one of the things that is unique to the Israelite culture, and God wanted them to keep that Sabbath. It was one of the things that made Israel very different from their neighbors around them. And they had a hard time doing it. I mean, they did. They had a hard time doing it. You'd think it wouldn't be so hard to do nothing, but for some reason it was. The people of Israel called the bread manna, and if you look at your notes down here, manna means, what is it? So they didn't know what it was. It was white, like coriander seed, and tasted like wafers made with honey. Moses said, "This is what the Lord has commanded. Take an omer of manna and keep it for the generations to come, so they can see the bread I gave you to eat in the desert when I brought you out of Egypt." I believe this was the only time in all of human history when this manna appeared in the world. If you're trying to find any evidence for what this manna may have been, I don't think you're ever going to find it. I believe this was a specific, miraculous kind of food that only existed for this stretch of time while they were out in the wilderness and needed to be sustained by God. And I don't think it's ever grown before or since. I don't think they didn't know what it was. They didn't recognize it. Even Moses in the text writing down about it doesn't, and he tells it what it's like. He doesn't identify it as being something that they know what it is. I don't think it ever grew before. I don't think it's ever appeared on earth since. God wanted them to keep part of it, a sample of it, and put it in the Ark of the Covenant that they're going to build eventually, so they would have a memento of it for all generations to come. Of course, it's gone now. The Ark of the Covenant's long gone now. But I don't believe this is anything you're ever going to find any evidence of in nature, because I don't believe it came from nature, and I don't believe it's been seen on earth since. There's going to come a point in time when they get into the land down in the book of Joshua where it specifically says that on a certain day the manna from heaven ceased, and I don't think it's ever been seen on earth since. So Moses said to Aaron, "Take a jar and put an omer of manna in it, then place it before the Lord, to be kept for the generations to come." Eventually it'll end up going into the ark they're going to make later. As the Lord commanded Moses, Aaron put the manna in front of the testimony, that it might be kept. The Israelites ate manna 40 years, until they came to the land that was settled. They ate manna until they reached the border of Canaan. An omer is 1/10 of an ephah. Just so you want to know. You know any more you knew before? Does that make any more sense than it did earlier? The whole Israelite community set out from the desert of Sin, traveling from place to place as the Lord commanded. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. So they quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." So they got food, now they need water. Moses replied, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you put the Lord to the test?" But the people were thirsty for water there, and they grumbled against Moses. They said, "Why did you bring us up out of Egypt, to make us and our children and livestock die of thirst?" Then Moses cried out to the Lord, "What am I to do with these people? They are almost ready to stone me." The Lord answered Moses, "Walk on ahead of the people. Take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile, and go. I will stand there before you by the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock, and water will come out of it for the people to drink." So Moses did this in the sight of the elders of Israel. And he called the place Massah and Meribah, because the Israelites quarreled, and because they tested the Lord, saying, "Is the Lord among us or not?" Massah and Meribah. Massah means testing, and Meribah means quarreling. The Amalekites came and attacked the Israelites at Rephidim. Moses said to Joshua, "Choose some of our men." So this was their first actual fight. They didn't end up having to fight the Egyptians. Pharaoh once thought they would, but they didn't. They never ended up fighting the Egyptians, but they are going to fight the Amalekites. Now, they probably have the Egyptians' weapons of war. Whatever they managed to salvage from the Egyptians' bodies after they washed up from the Red Sea, I believe the Israelites took those tools of war and have them now. And I don't know how trained they were as a fighting nation. We did read, like I said earlier, they were armed for battle when they went out of Egypt. I don't know if they were ready for battle. They have a general. They have Joshua, who's already their general. So they have some idea of war. Now, Moses probably, in his younger days, when he was a prince of Egypt, Moses probably, in fact, certainly was trained for warfare. Maybe he taught Joshua. I don't know. I don't think the Israelites themselves would have been. You wouldn't, if you were the Egyptians, the ruling class, you wouldn't have trained your slave force to know how to fight. That doesn't make any sense. Because then they could fight against you. You might want them to help to fight against enemies if they come, but I mean, your entire fear is that they'll join the enemies and fight you. So I don't think that the Egyptians would have trained them how to fight, but Moses may have. Moses and Joshua may have. Now, they wouldn't have had a whole lot of time to train, because it's only, Moses comes back. This whole time period in which Moses leaves Horeb, leaves the area where he's been shepherding, and comes back to Egypt, and then comes back again, is less than a year. So they wouldn't have had a whole lot of time to train. Now, they would have had the tools of war that they got from the Egyptians. So, I don't know exactly. Moses himself would have had war experience as a prince of Egypt. And like I said, Josephus gives us an account of him actually fighting against the Ethiopians. So he would have known, at least in his younger days, he would have known about war. I don't know how well trained the rest of the Israelites are. But at any rate, this is their first actual fight. They never ended up having to fight the Egyptians, so they are going to have to fight these Amalekites. So the Amalekites came and attacked the Israelites at Rephidim. Moses said to Joshua, "Choose some of our men and go out to fight the Amalekites. Tomorrow I will stand on top of the hill with the staff of God in my hands." So Joshua fought the Amalekites as Moses had ordered, and Moses, Aaron, and Hur, H-U-R, went to the top of the hill. As long as Moses held up his hands, the Israelites were winning, but whenever he lowered his hands, the Amalekites were winning. When Moses' hands grew tired, they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. Aaron and Hur held his hands up, one on one side, one on the other, so that his hands remained steady till sunset. So Joshua overcame the Amalekite army with the sword. So the Lord is fighting with them, and he's giving them victory as long as Moses' hands are up. But he's not empowering Moses to keep his hands up without help. Moses needs assistance to keep his hands up the whole time, because God is not giving Moses unlimited physical stamina to keep his hands up. But there's a partnership going on here. God is giving them the victory as long as Moses' hands are up, but he's not empowering Moses with the strength needed to keep his hands up all day. So Moses then must rely on help to keep his hands up so the Israelites can win. God will fight for Israel, but he wants Israel to work with him to do so. It's the same thing even to this day. God intends for human beings to work with him. He will do it. He will, whether or not we do, he'll get the job done on his own. That's what Jesus comes to do. Nobody else ever ended up doing God's will perfectly, so he just became man and did it himself. But the intent, God's intent, has always been for human beings to work with him. And we see that happen here. Then the Lord said to Moses, so they've driven the Amalekite army. We don't know why the Amalekites attacked them. They just did. The Amalekites, for some reason, just decided to attack the Israelites here. Doesn't explain why. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Write this on a scroll as something to be remembered, and make sure that Joshua hears it, because I will completely blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven." So this is our first instance of the Lord specifically telling Moses to write something down. Moses built an altar and called it, "The Lord is my banner." He said, "For hands were lifted up to the throne of the Lord. The Lord will be at war against the Amalekites from generation to generation. I think that was true. I think these Amalekites end up going, I don't know if it's this particular branch of them or the rest of the army afterwards. I believe they end up going down to Egypt. Now the Israelites are no longer there, and the Egyptian army has been decimated, and conquering Egypt and ruling them as the Hyksos for the next couple hundred years. And we don't even know, in Egypt, in the Egyptian records, they don't name these people. They just call them the Hyksos, the shepherd kings. They don't give their tribe name. Here, I think we have it as the Amalekites. But God says to Moses, He's going to blot out their name from under heaven. And in fact, the only place where their name is recorded is right here in the pages of the Scripture themselves. Other historical references to them have in fact been obscured, and their names have been blotted out from under heaven.